So I finally got a new camera to replace my iPhone as the main video camera of this channel. Let's see how good it is. Canon M50 has been getting quite a bit of heat online. I mean, a lot of people are just hating on it. But let's see how good it actually is. I'll try to be as unbiased as possible. Box, pretty basic, nothing special here. I got it without the kit lens. That's that. Doesn't come with too much. Let's get that out of the frame. Basic strap. This absolutely preposterously small battery. And then, of course, you get the camera itself, which is also very small, fittingly. And that's kind of nice. Now, that small size does translate into a smaller grip, which means slightly less comfort, as you can see here. But it's really not too bad. Let's go over the external features. Starting from the front, this really looks like a mini DSLR. It has that classic Canon shape. I just really like the way it looks, something about it. You have your classic focus light, which I tend to turn off, I don't really like it. It is orange. You have your you have your lens release here, and then of course I have this on here right now. Taking that off reveals our EFM mount with our APS-C sized 24 megapixel sensor. Grip, as I said, a little bit small, but it's not too bad. It's nice and rubberized. And then let's come to the top here. The top, we find our only control dial. That is one of the big things about this. This is not an extremely user-friendly camera if you're used to analog controls. You have one dial, that's it. Shutter, half press, full press, video, special function button. You have a hot shoe here, and then a mode dial, on and off switch. I do like this positioning of the on and off switch. Nothing on this side, since it's so small, you need somewhere to rest your hands. And then you have your EVF with the eye cup. You have these zoom buttons, which I set this one to back button focus. That's how I prefer it. Information, and then your classic buttons here. There is no dial, so this cannot rotate. It's just buttons. And then you can see your standard menu and playback buttons. And then now here you have your big 3-inch flip screen. This is one of the big things about this camera. Because it only has one dial, it's more designed to be used with the flip screen pretty much all the time. Some people might not like that, but I personally do like it. Flips back and forth, you can see. And that's really convenient, especially for video makers. Because you can see if we flip it this way, other way, sorry. We can now see ourselves. See exactly what we're recording, if we're trying to vlog or something like that. So that's a very nice feature of this camera. I do not know why more camera companies do not do this. I do not like the screens that can only flip up and down while in place. I just don't. This is what I like, and it works perfectly for me. Here on this side, kind of hard to see, but that's better. You have your mic jack, no headphone jack. So that is a big downside for video makers at the same time. And then one of your sling mounts, your strap mounts, and another strap mount on the other side, and your HDMI out. And I do not know what this button does, if I'm honest with you. I've never used it. It looks like some sort of Bluetooth radio thing, but when I connected to my phone, I didn't even have to use that button, so I don't know what that's about. Coming down to the bottom finally, your standard tripod mount, and of course your battery door with your memory card slot as well. So we're actually going to insert those right now. Takes your standard memory cards, nothing special here, just an SD card. Let's see. Just like that, clicks in. And then battery as well. As I said, this is just tiny, it's really inadequate. Runs out of battery super fast, but I guess you'll get used to it, but bring a lot of batteries. There are quite a few aftermarket batteries which work perfectly fine for me. Is that the wrong way? No, it isn't. There you go. And then just close it up. There you go. That's the external features. Pretty simple. Takes your standard SD cards, nothing special here. Just click it into that slot in there. If I can line it up properly. There you go. And then, as I said, this battery is completely inadequately small. They wanted to save weight, I guess. I still don't understand why they can't just put at least slightly bigger batteries in here, but they just don't. But I guess you live with it and you buy extras. Buy a lot of extras. I personally use aftermarket batteries. Whether you would like to do that or not is up to you. Now we can close it up and we're good to go. One last thing I did forget to mention is up here you have your flash, which you do have to flip up manually. There you go, that's the externals. Now a little bit more on the actual controls of the camera that I talked a little bit about earlier. If we turn the camera on, flip our screen out. Whoops, did not mean to do that. Okay, and here we are. So we are in, let's go to full manual mode, there you go. You can see currently this little orange control knob type looking thing. That's to symbolize which setting you're on. So right now we cannot change our aperture because there's no lens on it, and we're out of focus. Good job. But you can see moving the control dial I showed you next to the shutter button does change it, and then you toggle it by clicking this button to toggle through which setting. But this camera, as I said, only has one dial, so it really works much better if you do it with a touchscreen. So you can just click on it and drag it back and forth. The touchscreen is excellent, it has a very good implementation, very easy to use, and very sensitive. There you go. Alright, now to touch a little bit more on those controls. You can see what control is selected currently with the dial with this little orange dial looking thing. Whatever that is on, that's the one you'll toggle with the dial, as you can see. And then clicking this exposure comp button will switch that. For your ISO, I've set my ISO to be the special function button. So hit that and now I can toggle my ISO. It's a bit of a hassle having just one dial, I will definitely admit that. That is made easier, however, by the excellent implementation of the touchscreen. It is very, very easy to use, very sensitive. It works almost as well as an iPhone touchscreen, to be honest. It's just slightly lower resolution. It is still pretty sharp to the naked eye. If it looks blurry to you right now, that's just because it's through an iPhone camera. So you can see that you can just slide it back and forth, and it's very, very simple to use. Well, we don't have a lens on it right now, actually. You can see, works just as well as the dial, if not better for most people. Additionally, Canon has decided to implement a touch shutter, as seen by this button. Currently it is off. I usually set it to off just so when I try to focus, it doesn't mess it up, because it also does have touch to focus. However, if you would like, you can turn on the touch shutter, so you don't have to hit this shutter button, and you can just touch the screen to take a shot. Of course, it will not take a shot because I don't have a lens on right now. Touch to focus also works extremely well, and oftentimes touch to focus and touch shutter work better in situations when it's on a tripod, or when you're trying to minimize shutter, or the shake from clicking the shutter button. Overall, the touchscreen implementation is excellent. The menu also works with the touchscreen. In fact, don't want to do that. It probably works almost better with the touchscreen than it does with the dial. The dial, you do have to switch through all of this. Overall, the controls, they're certainly not the best on any camera. In fact, it's one of the real upper hands of the other main mirrorless camera Canon has, the Canon M5, which is quite a bit older, and it's actually more expensive, I believe. But the main reason it's expensive is it has those more controls that make it feel more professional. One dial, bit of a hassle, but you get used to it, especially with such a nice touchscreen. Now, let's talk about that EVF. This is a big reason many people tend to stay on DSLRs, but also a big reason many people move over. Some people love them, others hate them. I personally do like them. While many pros will tell you that you don't need the exposure preview, I think it's an excellent feature that helps a lot. As you can see. Pretty much see what you're gonna get. In terms of colors, however, I found that it tends to be off by just a tiny little bit. It's kind of weird, but honestly it doesn't matter that much because if you're shooting in RAW, you'll probably be processing your color anyways, and if you're not shooting in RAW, chances are you don't really care about the color that much to worry about that tiny little shift. Additionally, it has an optional depth of field preview as well. I don't think you can really tell right now through the camera, but you can definitely hear that sound of the aperture. Sorry, trying to keep it in the frame here. Additionally, it is quite sharp. It has pretty much a standard resolution. I believe it's 2.3K million dots or something like that. Pretty standard for this type of viewfinder, especially your entry level. Plenty sharp enough. And additionally, it's quite bright, plenty bright, especially considering while it's a viewfinder, you won't have to worry about sunlight. And that brings up another good point, because you can review your, there you go. You can review your pictures in this as well. So if there's bright sunlight, you can see all your pictures and review them without having to use the back screen and battle with that glare. So overall, the EVF is quite nice and easy to use. One more thing, obviously you can't really tell through this camera. However, the coverage is almost 100%. Actually, three more things I should probably mention. It does switch automatically to the EVF from the back screen, depending on where your eye is. So that has a feature in there that senses the distance of your face, which is pretty cool. Additionally, with this, the big advantage here is you get focus peaking. You see that blue on the outline of that bag there? It tells you what's in focus and what's not. Excellent for manual focus. Finally, viewfinder lag is really not a problem as far as I've noticed. Used to be a huge problem making these EVFs unusable, but that was a long time ago. These days they've gotten very good. Now it's time to address one of the biggest problems of the EOS M50. And in fact, it's not a problem with the camera itself, but a problem with the whole EFM line, the lens selection. It is pretty abysmal. There are only a few lenses. There's like one telephoto zoom total. 2 if you count the general purpose one, but that's not a huge range. And the kit lenses are not as sharp as the normal APS-C kit lenses for their normal DSLR lineup. That's a really big disadvantage. However, I still bought the camera, and I bought it without the kit lenses. Why? Well, not because I'm crazy and I want to spend a bunch of money on the other EFM lenses, but rather simply because you can get an adapter for around, oh gosh, it's normally up around $150–200, which is ridiculous. However, there's a deal on Amazon, or rather there was a deal, where you could get them as a kit and the adapter would be like something like $50. So that was a good deal and I bought it. And additionally, if there's not the deal right now, which I don't think there is, you can always buy the adapter used, especially because it's an adapter, you should not mind buying it used at all. And it's a much better way of doing things. Adapter, if I can just slip it on here, just like that. And unlike most lenses, especially if you cross companies, when you adapt, you'll pretty much lose your effective autofocus. It'll be really slow and iffy. No, this maintains the perfect autofocus of the original system, even with an EFM lens. It's pretty much identical. So that opens up the whole EF lens selection to us, which pretty much solves this problem in my opinion. Some of you will still not want to adapt and want to use your native lenses, but, oh, I just touched the lens. Great, I have to wipe that off now. But, you know, that's your loss in my opinion. So that allows you to adapt on your whole EF lineup, such as this nifty 50 here. I even went out and bought the kit lenses separately. Of course, the white box versions, so they're not ridiculously expensive, but in my opinion, they're still worth it, because I don't know if you guys know, but the EF kit lenses are quite sharp. Especially at 55–200, if you have an APS-C camera, it's a very sharp lens. So that addresses lens selection. Now, many people are probably concerned about the autofocus of this camera, seeing as it is an entry-level mirrorless, and just years ago, even the professional mirrorless cameras could not match up to your entry-level DSLRs. That may have been an exaggeration, but you know what I mean. A7 III kind of solved this, excellent autofocus, and then the Fujifilms also have excellent autofocus. However, how will the low-end Canon camera stack up? Pleased to say it does just fine. In fact, it is one of the highlights of this camera. It features not only Canon's hybrid on-sensor phase detect for stills, but also their excellent dual pixel autofocus for videos. It is an extremely dim room right now, actually. Very poor lighting. You guys probably can't tell though, but there's my setup. We're going to test it out using just the touch to focus on the screen. Unlike with the DSLR, the back screen live view mode with focus is the exact same as it is in the viewfinder. And you can see it's very snappy. you'll see the screen light up a bit. That just goes to show how dark it is. It's trying to use the light to light it up. But even in such a dark room, it's almost instant, and it has that kit lens on it, so it's not like the world's most amazing lens either. It's not the lens doing the work. The camera's autofocus is just excellent. And I'm about to run out of battery, whoops. But you can see very fast, even in such low light. That really speaks to the excellent autofocus of this camera. Now let's take a closer look at those AF settings for stills mode. There is of course standard one shot and servo. You have face and tracking, zone or single, nothing special here. And then, don't know what that means to be honest with you. Eye detection is currently grayed out because eye detection needs one shot to work. It cannot track subjects, it cannot stay on during continuous shots, only for portraits when the subject is not moving at all. Personally, I don't know how useful that is. I don't shoot portraits to be honest, but it would definitely not work for sports, I know that for sure, because it is not continuous. And then Canon has a weird thing where their continuous AF is actually the servo AF, and then what they're calling continuous is actually just means that it focuses continuously no matter whether you press the shutter or not. So you could just have the camera down by your side and it'll keep focusing. I turned that off. I don't see any use in that at all. So I say we test out some of the other modes. I had it on single point mode there. Now let's test out the eye detect. Now, to give you an idea of the eye autofocus, I do not have anyone who is willing to be my subject, so I printed out a photo of the founder, or not founder, but CEO of Canon. You can see it automatically tracks both the face and the eye once it's turned on. There's a box around the face and a smaller one around the eye. And then clicking back button focus here, it'll focus on it. Back button focus you can set up manually inside your menu. So if you double click the zoom button below it, here, I'll show you. That button, second one, if it'll focus here. This one, double click it and it'll switch eyes. You can see, works pretty well. But as I said, that only works when your subject is absolutely not moving, which makes it, in my opinion, not awfully useful. And this is well behind other cameras, especially something like the Sony, which it just has perfect eye autofocus, and it can focus when the eyes are half closed, everything under the sun. Finally, let's test the big one, tracking, subject tracking. A lot of cameras struggle with this, so let's go for it. We have it in tracking mode, of course. Oh, there you go. It just focused on the wall. If you come forward in the frame, it's still on the wall. Okay, try 2. Reset it there. Once again on the pup. Okay, it worked that time. So the first time it actually missed, and after locking onto the dog, I moved it around a bit and it just went straight to the wall and stayed there. I don't know why, to be honest with you. So now let's test distractions in the background. Okay, good. So it stayed focused on the dog, which is, I guess, probably what you want. So overall, the autofocus is not perfect. It's far from perfect. Probably would not recommend it for something like wildlife. However, it does work, and it works very well, especially for this price point for a mirrorless camera. Finally, let's test out that famous Canon dual pixel AF. Finally, let's test Canon's famous dual pixel autofocus in video mode. Recording a video right now, so let's see how it happens. Oh, it focused on my hand. That's kind of to be expected because I had my hand up. The face isn't sharp because I set it to the wrong point. That's my bad. Let's try that again. It's trying to focus on the leg there. so the face isn't completely sharp, but it does track the subject. I think that's a problem with this particular prop. And then now one more thing. So I turned off tracking this time, and I also want to test that dual pixel AF with single point. So we move this subject out of that point and it'll automatically focus on the wall. Beautiful, nice and smooth, and pretty responsive too. There you go. Responsive and smooth, exactly what dual pixel is known for. Beautiful. Now let's test that burst speed, advertised at 10 frames per second, which is excellent, especially for this price. Let's see how true that is. First, in continuous autofocus, I expect it to be much slower. We're not actually tracking anything since our subject is stationary, so it'll probably be even slower in the real world, but let's just get an idea. Wow. It's pretty fast, I'll give you that. Definitely not 10, but maybe up there at 7 or something. The problem is the buffer, it's tiny. Now let's go to manual focus and see if it does any better. So it won't have to worry about focusing anymore. Whoops, just turned that off. So let's try that again. Wow, that buffer left even quicker. I think the frame rate went up a bit, so the buffer just completely died. What was that, 5 shots? Try it again. Okay, so it's fast, I'll give it that. But other than that, the buffer is a big problem. So it is not ideal for sports or wildlife. Now for that burst speed and buffer. This has an advertised 10 frames per second, which is excellent, especially for this price point, and it competes with high-end DSLRs. So let's see how accurate that is. First, we'll be doing continuous autofocus on the zone AF mode, not tracking mode, just zone AF, and we're not going to worry about shutter speed because it's going to be very high at 1,000th. Brand new, just formatted card, 64 gigabytes, 80 megabytes per second, UHS 1. So that should not hold it back whatsoever. So let's give it a go. Okay, so it was very fast, but as expected, definitely not 10 frames per second. But that's expected with continuous autofocus. That's more of a single shot, a non-autofocus or single autofocus type of scenario. So we'll give it the benefit of the doubt there. However, I noticed the buffer was tiny. That was probably less than a second of shooting, and that's not going to do well for wildlife or sports photography, because while it is fast, you're barely getting any amount of shots there. Now, how about we switch over to manual focus? So not even single auto, just straight up manual, so it doesn't have to worry about it. So let's try it again. And there you go, that's a lot more like 10 frames per second. I'm not sure if that's actually 10, but it sounded quite a bit faster. However, the buffer got even smaller because it was writing even more rapidly. Once again, this is the highest speed card this camera can take, so that's a little bit concerning. So overall, the burst rate is fine. In fact, it's very good. However, you definitely sacrifice your buffer. So one last test. Canon has this mode called low speed continuous, which is tracking priority. Now, oh, it just disappeared. That's fine. I am still on manual focus right now, so that the tracking isn't going to apply. But I do want to see how long the buffer lasts if it purposely slows itself down a little bit. This might be a little bit more realistic for real world scenarios, depending on what you're shooting. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, that's disappointing. That slowed it down more than I thought it would. However, it was definitely a usable frame rate. But what was really disappointing is the buffer barely got bigger in terms of the amount of shots. That's a little bit pathetic. Now onto some basic specs, which I probably should have covered earlier. We're looking at, which disappeared, a camera with a max shutter speed of 1/4000th of a second, which is perfectly adequate in my opinion. However, some special situations you might need 1/8000th. I've never used anything above 1/1000th, if I'm honest with you, so I don't think that'll be a problem. It goes all the way down on the low end, scrolling, to 1/30th of to 30 seconds, but there's also a bulb option. However, for that you have to manually hold down your shutter. In terms of ISO, all the way up to 25,600, but that's your extended ISO. Strongly don't recommend using that. We'll take a bit closer look at ISO later on. And its base ISO is a pretty standard 100. In terms of the actual sensor inside the body, we'll be looking at a 24 megapixel APS-C sized sensor with a 1.6 times crop factor, which fits the normal Canon APS-C spec, unlike the 1.5 times crop of the Nikon. It is pretty similar to something you'll find in, say, a T7i, except this has on-sensor phase detect. Now that you guys have sat through all that, I think it's about time we take a look at some sample photos. We're now on the computer to take a look at our ISO performance. So, starting at ISO 100, it's, as to be expected, virtually no detectable noise, even when we zoom in. That's great, but it's pretty standard. Up to 200, largely the same story. 400, still the same zoomed out. Zooming in, we see a little bit of noise, but it's very minor. 800. Here we start to see our noise come in. You can see it's especially noticeable on the handle here. There's quite a bit of color noise, but it's still nothing significant, especially when zoomed out it's hardly noticeable and some noise reduction will work well. Coming up to 16. Zoomed out, still we can actually barely see a difference. Zoomed in, of course, our noise is progressively getting a little bit worse. 3200. Zoomed in, it starts to look quite rough, especially on the handle. But even though it's rough when zoomed in, when we zoom out, it's actually not too bad. We can still see it definitely, but it's not horrible, and a little bit of noise reduction would definitely fix our problems. However, jumping up to 6400, we have a different story altogether. Now, in my opinion, the noise becomes much more noticeable. It's a very dramatic jump somehow, as you can see if you focus on the handle there. And then as we zoom in, of course, it starts to fall apart. But honestly, it's still usable, especially with noise reduction. However, if possible, I'd want to avoid this and recommend staying, having our upper limit as 3200. Now, of course, for kicks and giggles, we can go up to our ridiculous ISOs that no one uses. 12,800. That's really rough. Yeah. And then, where is it? 25,600. I mean, that's just crazy. Unusable. But otherwise, our noise performance is actually quite good. Just to give you a better idea here of the difference between 32 and 6400. Let me just see if I can get 64 pulled up. There we go. So 6400 is going to be on our left. On our right is 3200. So zoom in here. Zoomed in, there's actually not as big of a difference as I thought. But you can see there's definitely a significant difference, but zoomed out, in my opinion, is when it's most noticeable. So that's going to wrap up our noise performance. Alright, and now it is finally time for our example photos, and some of them look pretty nice if I do say so myself. All of them are shot in manual mode, and you can see the left pane here for settings the photo was taken at, and the lens used. Do note that the lenses used are all pretty cheap, kit lenses, so that will affect the quality of the photos, especially when zoomed in. That is going to determine our sharpness, so do not fault the camera if any photo is not sharp enough for your standards. Instead, I'd like you to focus on the noise, because that is up to the camera, and the colors. However, when focusing on noise, of course keep in mind the ISO it was shot at. Also, the star trails and the moon, the two towards the end, those two are stacked photos, so do keep that in mind. So now with that out of the way, I think that's all I need to go over. Let's get started. Now let's take a look at our video specs. So we have both manual and automatic video on this, and in terms of our video settings, we're fairly limited actually. So you can see we have a few options in here. We have things ranging from 4K, which does have a heavy crop on it. I will warn you of that. And you lose your famous dual pixel autofocus. That's what makes this such a good video camera in the first place. So the 24 frames per second 4K is severely limited, and that's the highest FPS you can go on 4K. In addition to that, you have your standard Full HD 60, and you even have the option of 720 60. We'll leave it on HD 60 for now. There is a high frame rate mode, which is essentially slow motion. You can get 120 FPS on 720, however, you also lose that famous autofocus on this mode. Additionally, there's no audio. Let's disable that. There is sound recording, but you do probably want another microphone, which is possible with the microphone jack. And additionally, you do have a time-lapse mode, which is very helpful, and it's quite customizable as well. One big thing with this camera is not only do you have all these video features, but one of the biggest video features isn't even in the settings. It's really the screen. It's touchscreen, so you can tap to focus. You have that dual pixel autofocus, which is super smooth, as I showed you earlier. And the screen can flip out so that, well, you guys can't see it right now, but imagine you were vlogging and you were out in front here. You could see what you're doing. Like, you can see you yourself on the screen when you're vlogging. Even if you're not vlogging, many applications, you might want it out to the side or just out front. And that's always very convenient. So, sorry, but I actually lost the video sample footage for this part. However, I can say that our stabilization, in-body digital stabilization, does not work as well as, of course, IBIS, which is in-body image stabilization, which is mechanical, or optical image stabilization in your lens. So try not to rely on that, or even do it in post if you need to. Our slow motion works quite nicely, it's nice and smooth, and our rolling shutter is not too bad. It really isn't. It is better than the Sony A series by quite a bit, which I guess doesn't say too much because they have notoriously bad rolling shutter, but I'll tell you that it's definitely usable. However, moving up to 4K mode is a different story. We get a huge 2.25 or something like that crop factor on top of our APS-C crop, which is just absolutely ridiculous. And the rolling shutter becomes horrific. So try your best to stay away from that 4K mode. Even though it's a kind of a selling point of this camera, it's more for advertising than for practical use. So keep that in mind before purchasing this camera. However, the 1080 works beautifully. In terms of wireless connectivity, this camera is amongst the best. You can see we have wireless settings here. The GPS is misleading because it's actually using your phone's GPS if you have it connected. But you can see it features not only Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connections, but also NFC. I found the iPhone app to be quite good actually, and the connection is quite seamless, especially after the first time. After your first connection, it'll connect pretty much automatically once you open the app. Very convenient. Unlike most camera apps, it is not a major hassle. Let me just show you. And guys, that's pretty much going to wrap it up. Wonderful little camera. Canon M50 is seriously underrated. I do not know why everyone hates on it. Even though the 4K is admittedly not very usable, it is still an excellent camera aside from that. Think about it. The Canon 80D doesn't even have 4K at all, and people still love it. Now, I'm not saying this is an 80D, but don't let the price fool you. The price of this, especially when it's on sale, is about half of an 80D, which is an excellent value because considering what you're getting almost everything in an 80D, and I'm not joking. If you compare the specs, there are a few differences, of course. However, in my opinion, for a lot of people this might even be better than an 80D for their personal needs because it's much lighter and more compact. Of course, an 80D overall is considerably a better camera. However, this is an excellent mid-level to entry-level camera. As I said, don't get fooled by the price. It can definitely compete up there with the 80D in the majority of scenarios. Excellent dual pixel autofocus and even stills autofocus really makes this camera stand out from the other entry-level mirrorless cameras. Very good EVF, and the lens selection problem, as I said, really is barely a problem if you're willing to work around it. Super compact, super handy, and that flip screen really just tops it off. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you liked this video. Give me a thumbs up if you want more camera reviews. Let me know what you want reviewed. And yeah, probably won't come true because I probably won't be getting a camera anytime soon, but I'll try to make anything that you guys want happen. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.